Hello everyone, welcome to another session for answer writing practice discussion. As you know, we are having mains answer writing practice from Monday to Friday. Every day we are putting up 3 questions, 2 questions from GS3 and 1 question from current affairs. Today in GS3 we will be delving into infrastructure, energy, ports, roads, airports and railways, and another on investment models. So let us see all the questions. The very first question we have is about there are different conventional energy sources and they are responsible for deteriorating environmental quality. For the same, we need to understand the need for non-conventional energy sources. We will be looking at what is the present India's energy crisis and how we can inculcate non-conventional energy sources. The second question is about public-private partnership. We have seen that PPP models are evolving and how they can actually help with respect to the infrastructure development in the nation. And the third question we'll be talking about is current affair based question. Over here, we'll be looking at the recently published India Aging Report by United Nations Population Fund. We'll be looking at the trends, the issues, and we'll be talking about what are the relevant things that we can inculcate for our mains preparation. So let us start with the very first question. The very first question, let's read the question together. Conventional energy sources are responsible for deteriorating environmental quality. In this context, discuss the potential of non-conventional energy sources in resolving India's energy crisis. Analyze the recent development in implementation of these resources. Over here, we have to understand the structuring of the question. The very first thing that we will talk about is the present India's energy outlook. And we'll also talk about what is the potential energy demand in future. Then we'll talk about how exactly the conventional energy sources are deteriorating in the environment. We can talk the same in the introduction. In the body part, we will talk about the potential of non-conventional energy sources in India and also talk about recent developments. So let us start with the introduction. In the introduction, we can start with data and statistics regarding India's energy demand and potential. You can talk about how almost 60% of our energy matrix is dominated by conventional sources of energy, and thus the remaining 36% of renewable energy, apart from that other forms of energy which are non-conventional energy, must be promoted. We can also talk about how this compounded annual growth rate of India's energy demand is growing at 3.5 to 5%. Now this kind of data we have gathered from international energy associations. We have also seen that such kind of data is also present in India Energy Outlook. So you can cite certain kind of reports in the introduction. So that's it for the introduction. Now we can go ahead and talk about, we know that conventional energy, they are creating environmental hurdles. So we must also understand potential of non-conventional energy in resolving India's energy crisis. Firstly, we can talk about solar energy. India is geographically situated in such a region where we have continuous supply of solar energy. We have 300 days where we get peak solar power. So we have the potential for solar energy. We have seen multiple initiatives in the same domain. Next is wind energy. We have vast amount of coastal region plus hilly region which is ideal for capturing wind energy. So India also have wind energy in the basket of non-conventional energy. The third is hydro energy. We have multiple rivers and those can be used for the same through conversion of hydro energy. And the fourth is biomass energy. We have witnessed that India also have certain kind of issue with solid waste, agriculture waste, etc., which can be utilized to form biomass energy. So this is India's potential with respect to non-conventional energy. Now let us look at what are the recent developments with respect to implementation of non-conventional energy resources. We have set certain renewable targets, as in we have said 175 gigawatt by 2022. Now this was 2022, but we saw that there was gap with respect to the same. We only able to achieve 122. So we understand over here that India is setting ambitious target with respect to achievement of renewable sources of energy. So that is in line with applying and inculcating non-conventional sources of energy. Second, we have seen that how India had been prominent player with respect to initiation of certain organization like International Solar Alliance. Over here, we are not just roping limited nation, we are scaling this into an international initiative for capturing non-conventional energy, especially solar. We have certain localized initiatives like Kusum scheme. Over here, we are trying to use the agricultural sector, and almost 10 gigawatt of energy is targeted here. Apart from that, we also have green hydrogen pilot projects. India, through National Green Hydrogen Mission, is targeting 5 million metric tons of production of hydrogen annually till 2030. So that is something you can talk about the recent initiative. Apart from that, Niti Aayog's methanol economy program is also very prominent with respect to eliminating the oil import dependency. So all this point you can write with respect to the recent development. Now, as we have understood the question, there is a certain narrative over here. First, we talked about the potential energy forms, then we talked about government initiatives, and the last we can talk about challenges. Despite multiple potential and initiatives, we have witnessed certain challenges with respect to implementation of non-conventional forms of energy. The very first is financial barrier. We have seen they cost high upfront cost. Because of such kind of barrier, multiple players who wants to participate in this sector, they are not able to because of high upfront cost. The second is technical challenges. We have witnessed that renewable forms of energy, solar energy, wind energy, they are continuously in the innovation mode. It's very difficult to inculcate the technology and apply them in the field. There is lots of issue with respect to integration. Also, apart from integration, we have witnessed that there is lots of wastage because of weather condition and etc. with respect to renewable forms of energy. And the last is socio-political challenge. To implement such kind of energy projects, first of all, we need land, but we have witnessed lots of issue with respect to land acquisition. That encompasses in the social and political challenges. So these are the major challenges that we have witnessed with respect to the implementation of non-conventional energy resources. At the end, in the conclusion, you can talk about, despite hurdles, India must ensure we are making sure that the non-conventional forms of energy, they also play substantial role in the entire energy matrix and help us to achieve the goal 7 of SDG, which is affordable, reliable and sustainable modern energy for all. So this is all for question number 1. Let us look at the model answer and see how we can inculcate the same in our answer writing. In the first, you can talk about the potential demand. You can also talk about how this demand is needed because of the conventional form and subsequent effect on the environment. Then you can talk about the potential of non-conventional energy. Over here, you can definitely cite certain state initiatives. In the recent development, you can talk about the different initiatives that we mentioned and also give proof points through substantiation. In the last challenges, you can talk about the points and give certain examples to substantiate your answer. And in the conclusion, you can talk about the importance of non-conventional form of energy, and you can also align, as we mentioned, with SDGs. So that is all for question number 1. Now let us move to question number 2. Question number 2. In what ways do government depend on private sector participation and collaboration to facilitate infrastructure investment, considering that public financing is often inadequate for such large-scale projects? Enumerate various forms of public-private partnerships that government engage in with private sector to expand infrastructure in the country. Over here, you have to understand this question is demanding. The very first thing is why government is dependent on private sector participation for infrastructure development, and the second is different forms of PPP models. So you will structure your answer that way. In the introduction, you can define public-private partnership. You can talk about how private organizations in collaboration with public agencies are aiding with respect to the infrastructure development. You can talk about the significance for the same for economic development. You can talk about how infrastructure development is directly related to economic development as well as growth. So that is something you can write in the introduction. In the body 1, you can cater to the very first demand of the question, which is government depends on private sector participation and collaboration. The very first reason for the same is inadequate public financing. We have witnessed that how the major budget of government is allocated towards the welfare programs, and because of such kind of direct welfare programs, government faces a lot of hurdles with respect to capturing the finances for infrastructure development. The second is public sector, they are not exactly epitome of innovation and technical expertise. For the same, we have private sector. So thus, a collaboration can help with respect to innovation, fund as well as implementation. The last is financial risk and cost. Infrastructure project, they come with lots of volatility, and thus having a reliable partner with respect to finance as well as with respect to technical expertise can mitigate the financial risk and cost. So these are the points that you write in your body 1. Now coming to the next part, which is forms of public-private partnership and infrastructure expansion. Over here, you can give out different forms of PPP models and explain them in 1-2 lines. The very first is build, operate, transfer. In this, public agencies allocate the entire project to a private company where they build, operate the entire infrastructure project, and they make sure till the point the revenues are realized as per the contract, and post that they transfer the entire project to the public entity. So that is build, operate, transfer. Over here, their funding is coming out from public body. The second is hybrid annuity model. Over here, there is mix match with respect to the funding. Almost 40% of the fund is given out by the public agency and 60% is given out by the private agency. Over here, the same thing will work, as in they will build the entire infrastructure project, they will operate, and they will transfer eventually to the public agency. Operate, maintain and transfer. Over here, the public agency will give the project to the private agency. They will operate, maintain, and post expiry of the contract, they will transfer that same to the public agency. Build, operate, lease, transfer. Now it is almost similar to the very first model. Only difference is over here is about the lease. Once they have expired their contract, the private agency will lease the entire project to the public enterprise and thus transfer the entire project to them. And the last is build, operate, transfer annuity model. Now this is a mix of ham model and bot model. Over here, once they transfer, they will also get yearly annuity for the infrastructure project. So these are the models. You can explain them in 1-2 line. You can also give examples for each. Like you can talk about how bot is generally used for highways. You can talk about how different models such as even ham are used for highways. Operate, maintain and transfer, this kind of models are used for airports and so on. So this is something that you can use in your answer with substantiation. Now in the conclusion, you can talk about the benefits and risks associated with PPP model. You can start with that there are certain benefits like the development of infrastructure, efficiency of the projects, transparency and accountable. However, there are certain risks as well, such as increased cost, reduced government control, increased complexity and political interference. So this is something you can write in the answer, and you can also subsequently add the last line as despite all this risk, government should explore different PPP models to ensure the infrastructure development is not halted, because infrastructure development will only help India with respect to the GDP target of $5 trillion. So that is something you can add in the conclusion. Let us see the model answer and see how we can inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. The first, we can talk about the definition of PPP models and how leveraging PPP models can help with respect to project completion and realization. Then you can talk about different ways the government is dependent on private participation, about funding, about expertise, about risks. Then you can talk about different forms. You can talk about different forms, explain them and give certain examples. Over here we have seen about BOT, about HAM model, about OMT model, about BOLT and BOT annuity. We have different examples for the same. You can ensure you write those examples to substantiate the entire argument. And the last, you can talk about how PPP are driving the infrastructure development in the nation, and thus they should be applied in different variety as per the need. You can also talk about different risks associated and conclude the answer. It's up to you. You have multiple options here. So that's for the question number 2. Now let's move to question number 3. With India's aging population on rise, it's imperative to address the diverse needs for well-being of the elderly population. Discuss in light of the recently released India Aging Report. We have witnessed that India Aging Report, which was released by United Nations Population Fund along with different groupings, we have witnessed that how India is going to face acute issue with respect to elderly. And for the same, we must ensure there are different measures involved. So in this question, we will start with the scenario. We'll talk about this different points that are being highlighted by the report. Then we'll talk about why do we need to address those issues with respect to aging, and we'll talk about certain measures that government has initiated. And in the conclusion, we can talk about how policy making must ensure that different measures are inculcated in the present day. So in future, when we are witnessing certain kind of demographic shift, we are ready for the same. So in the introduction, you can start with data points. You can talk about how in 2022, the proportion of elderly population is almost around 10%, which in 2050 will shoot to double, right? Almost over here. And in 2100, that proportion is almost going to be 36.1%. So over here we are witnessing that within few decades, the entire population ratio, as in the demography, will shift and elderly population will be doubled. You can cite this data in the introduction. You can cite that how United Nations Population Fund's report, India Aging Report, talks about the growth of elderly population, and thus their issues must be resolved. In the body 1, we will talk about diverse needs for elderly population. Over here, we are talking about the issues first, because why do we even need to tackle the issues at the first place? For the same, we need to understand the why part. So, firstly, the healthcare needs of elderly population are very different from the rest of the population, and thus they must be given very personalized attention. We have seen healthcare related issues as in different kind of non-communicable disease, etc. So that is something you can add over here. You can talk about physical disabilities, mental disabilities that comes with aging. The second is social support. We have witnessed that with increasing age, that chunk of population also faces certain kind of social issues, like the issue of loneliness, the issue of dependency with respect to the economic factors and all. So that is something you can write in the social support. Also in the economic support, we have witnessed that how elderly population are facing economic issues. As we have witnessed, the nuclearization of family is increasing. Parents do face certain kind of issue when their children move and migrate to other places for better economic opportunities. So that is something you can talk about in economic security. In housing and accessibility, you can talk about how those are the basic needs. Once elderly population are out of the economic cycle, they face difficulty with respect to affordable housing. And legal protection, we have seen various cases of domestic violence and other issues with respect to elderly population. And last is awareness and education. Despite multiple safeguards such as certain legal protections and certain initiatives like pension program and assistance program, elderly population are not able to access those because of lack of awareness. So all this you can add in this body aspect. You can substantiate the same with different data and statistic points. In the next body, you can talk about how it is imperative to meet this diverse needs of the elder population, right? So there is a second part of the demand. So you can talk about ensure quality healthcare and preventive services. Over here, you can talk about that there are certain programs like National Program for Healthcare for Elderly Population. Over here, specific attention is given to the health aspect of the elderly population. So, National Program for Healthcare of Elderly Population. In the second point, you can talk about facilitate affordable and age-friendly housing. We have witnessed that how certain schemes like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana is helping with respect to facilitating access to affordable housing. In the third, strengthening retirement income security, we have seen certain programs like social assistance program, Matru Vandana, Vaya Vandana Yojana, etc. They are helping with respect to retirement income security. And the last is promote social engagement and combat isolation. We have seen how community-based initiatives can help with respect to the social engagement and combat isolation. And the last is prevent elderly abuse. We have seen certain legal frameworks like welfare of maintenance and welfare of parents and senior citizens act. So certain kind of legal protections are also taken. So this is something you can talk about in this body. In the conclusion, you can talk about how policy making must inculcate the need and the issues of the elderly right now, so that by 2050, when the elderly population is going to be doubled, we have all the provisions in place. Apart from that, you can also talk about how different SDGs are in line with respect to the issue of elderly population. You can talk about poverty, hunger, you can talk about different reduced inequalities and sustainable cities and communities, where we are talking about community support as well as housing. So all this you can as well inculcate in your answer. So this is for question number 3. Let us see the model answer and understand how we can inculcate the same in our answer writing practice. In the first introduction, you can talk about the India Aging Report. You can cite different data points. There is another data point which talks about decadal growth, which is 40% almost. So that is something which also reflects the need in the introduction. Then we talk about the diverse needs. As we have mentioned, you can also cite certain examples, certain data points like in the economic security. You can talk about that 40% of elderly population, they belong to economic class which is facing multidimensional poverty, and over here you can also see how 18% have no source of income at all. So this is something, a very scary picture. You can talk about the same over here. And then you can also talk about different initiatives like program for healthcare for elderly, talk about Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, Matru Vandana Vaya Mantri Vaya Vandana Yojana, National Social Assistance Program, program for older pension. So these are different kind of initiatives. You can talk about the same, and in the end you can talk about the need for all this program and why policy making must ensure and inculcate all of this in their policy. So that is all for today's answer writing practice video discussion. Thank you and keep writing.